Hey Kings, welcome back to the Augustus Maximus channel and the World of Hearts of Iron 4, where again we're using the Together for Victory Overhaul mod, today playing as Australia. And we'll begin trying out the Australian Empire, which is essentially just a fascist path for Australia if you want to, well, just play fascist Australia. And I think it's kind of it's definitely an interesting path for Australia because they are essentially uncontested when it comes to the immediate surroundings, other than Japan and, realistically only Japan in a single-player game. You are essentially unchallenged when it comes to the dominance within the Pacific sphere. If you don't want to, if you don't necessarily want to go up against the United States, and even if you do go up against the United States, it takes such a long time for them to do anything. You are essentially unchallenged when it comes to the dominance of, of the regional sphere. And I think because of this position, we're going to try and build an empire and try to sort of imitate our the mother country, Britain, obviously. As they have an empire, we're going to try and build an empire of our own. And we're going to try to build an Asian and Pacific-focused empire, not necessarily colliding with the British Empire that much, other than the necessary components that we're going to need. For example, New Zealand and everything like that, even Australia itself, obviously. But I think we're not going to try and challenge, for example, the Allies or the United States or just the British Dominion, anything like that. We're not going to do anything like that. We're just going to try and dominate the sphere immediately around us, which means that the only immediate conflict we will possibly have is with China and Japan, which means that the overall goal when it comes to building the Australian Empire, and my goal within this video and within this playthrough, is to actually dominate basically Japan and China, meaning we're going to conquer the entirety of China and then Japan within a reasonable time frame. Obviously, if you play until like 1970, you can conquer anyone as anyone. You can do world conquest as Luxembourg potentially, but that's not what we're going to be doing today. We're going to utilize the Together for Victory Overhaul mod when it comes to giving Australia actually some fun when playing down a unique path. We're going to try and utilize the industrial bonuses, the military bonuses, the naval bonuses, the regional bonuses, everything like that, the core territory, the manpower, to try and build an empire in a reasonable time frame, try to challenge the Japanese. The Japanese are a formidable threat when it comes to actually fighting a land war, because while when it comes to fighting against the United States on a naval conflict, when it comes to naval conflicts, they tend to suffer because they don't have enough resources when it comes to oil and everything like that. However, because we'll be taking them head on even during the Chinese War, essentially, or probably, I'm not entirely sure, and we'll probably team up with them and then betray them or something along those lines. It's going to be tough to actually break their divisions because of just how many buffs they get. They do have they obviously have the plus 10% attack, 10% defense, and some org bonuses. The generals are pretty decent as well. And they have 100% stability and war support from the beginning of the game up until the end, essentially. So this is going to be a tough one, I think, when it comes to fighting off Japan. But ultimately, that's the plan. That's the battle plan, or that's the plan for this campaign. Build yourself an empire, try to amass enough of an army to take on China and then Japan, and try to do it within a reasonable time frame, and try not to come into conflict with any other major powers other than Japan, obviously. We're going to sort of replace Japan as sort of the dominant force when it comes to the Pacific, and essentially that's the plan here. Also, we're gonna try and break free from the British as quickly as possible, but luckily this mod, which I think is one of my favorites when it comes to actually playing the British miners. Obviously, Rota 56 has very good alternatives, but I like mods that are sort of focused just on one country. For example, the Russia Overhaul mod, or some Germany Overhaul mods, or some Austria-Hungary overhaul mods. Just, you know, when a mod is focused on one specific country, it tends to sort of tailor the entire gameplay experience towards that one country. Whereas, for example, when you try Road to 56, sure, there are a lot of flavor events, sure, there's a lot of craziness involved, and I really like Road to 56 when it comes to just general gameplay, because it's not just about the flavor for one nation, it's about the overall flavor of basically every nation, right? Or almost every nation. When it comes to these like focused mods, I really like them because, you know, the people have done a lot of research, you know, the people have done an extreme amount of hard work when it comes to just perfecting one country or a small set of countries, like the British miners or the British puppets, essentially, at the beginning of the game in 1936, obviously. So I really like both mods, but I really like the Together for Victory Overhaul mod when it comes to actually playing the British miners. It's a little bit OP when it comes to just it's a little bit OP when it comes to obviously the game balance in general. Your units tend to be quite powerful, and you do tend to have a lot of resources, everything like that. But at the beginning of the game, you're still terrible, and you have to build yourself up. It's not like you're gonna become a superpower overnight. You're gonna maybe become a major power in like 1940, you know, so it does take time. Maybe it basically speeds up the process of maybe acquiring more industrial power by like 1 year, because realistically you would be able to acquire a lot of manpower, a lot of industry and everything just from exploiting. For example, as Australia can acquire immense amounts of manpower just by going into China, puppeting communist China, and then just draining them of manpower, and you'll have like 50 million manpower. Doesn't necessarily matter that you haven't necessarily got the core territory, as long as you exploit the game. And I think that's why I really like these mods, because it allows you to have a lot of fun without the need to exploit, because you can get essentially infinite manpower as any nation, as long as you puppet communist China with any sort of reasonable territory. Even just a few provinces, when you have communist China as a puppet, you'll have at least like 3 million manpower. So you know, we don't have to exploit, we don't have to do a lot of broken stuff, but ultimately we're still gonna have a lot of fun. And how's that for a 7.5-minute introduction of a video? But yeah, so that's basically the plan. And I'm gonna skip forward quite a bit, I think, because well, I'm playing Australia, not much actually happens until like 1939. Alright, here we go. We just flipped Fash not too long ago, and we are about to, there we go, support Indonesian Uprising, which essentially means that, you know, this is also in vanilla. We're just gonna make the Dutch East Indies revolt. However, in the vanilla game, not entirely sure if they become your puppet or not. But in this, within this mod, they definitely become your puppet. And with this focus here, we can ask the British to hand over British Malaya. So we're definitely gonna do that, because, well, obviously, if we, that's something that is also involved if you're playing as a democratic nation, and it's something that just makes sense. Obviously, the Australian sort of sphere. They see that we are expanding, and as long as we don't go against their sort of I don't know, sphere of influence, which, you know, you could say that the British Malaya is within their sphere of influence, but, you know, you could argue that we're just trying to take over, you know, because they are obviously stretched. They have other things to worry about. Europe is about to explode completely, so maybe it would be better if British Malaya was under our care. And even though we don't have the same ideology, we can roleplay a bit and say that, you know, because they've been so cordial with us, we're definitely not going to attack them in any way. We're not gonna involve ourselves in the British sphere, because they have been so accommodating when it comes to British Malaya, and they have been kind enough to hand over territory that is necessary for the creation of the Australian Empire, let's say. But here we are, we're gonna support the, obviously, the Indonesians, or the Indonesian First Order, or whatever they're called, because, well, we definitely want them to win, and the Dutch East Indies themselves, they do actually have quite a bit of manpower and quite an army, I think. Well, they both have roughly the same amount of divisions and same amount of strength and everything, so and the Australian Volunteer Force is definitely going to come in handy So there we go. I'm not entirely sure if you can in vanilla. I'm pretty sure you can do basically the same thing as we're doing right now. You can just sort of send volunteers to the Indonesian uprising, but I'm not entirely sure if you. It has to be a little bit stronger in here. Like maybe you can only send 2 volunteers or something like that. And yep, there we go. They should be flipping to us any moment now. And yeah, British Malaya obviously, but it should become, that's a long lag as always, Hearts of Iron 4. There we go, Australian Malaya. That's actually quite nice. It's actually quite nice. For example, if you're playing Democratic Japan and you ask for the, you know, the takeover of British Malaya, even if you still puppet them, they're still just called British Malaya, even though it should be now called, you know, or it should be then called Japanese Malaya. So I kind of like that they, the mod developer, actually managed to do something like that. That it switches colors and names and everything like that. And yeah, that's actually pretty decent. So yeah, we managed to encircle a few divisions of the Dutch East Indies here, and I think we should be quite, yeah, but they do have, they're fortified quite nicely there, so should be able to push through anyway. It's not like they're really any match for our masterful 4 divisions. There we go, managed to push through, and we're gonna encircle them, and now it's just a matter of pushing across these straits, which, you know, a smart person, a really strategically thinking person, this was only about tactics and strategy, would basically just navally invade behind them, but because we want to grind our generals quite a bit, it's actually, in Hearts of Iron 4 logic, it's actually better just to smash yourself across the strait, because you'll constantly be winning the battle and leveling yourself up, but you won't actually push through because the enemy will constantly reinforce. It's basically the same situation as when you're playing against the Turks and you want to cross the Bosporus Strait with your army. You could be constantly winning the battle, but they'll be constantly reinforcing, which means that you'll get a lot of traits. However, it's gonna take a long time till you actually push through. Sort of an interesting aspect of the game that doesn't really promote you playing strictly strategically, but it does promote you just breaking the game a little bit. And I kind of like, one thing that I really like is that you get Edward VIII, which I think in vanilla you can get with South Africa, I'm pretty sure, but here, you know, he's for obviously the Empire of Australia. Well, now at the moment we're called the Centralist Australia, but we should be known as the Empire of Australia once he becomes king, or emperor essentially, which I suppose that makes sense. I suppose that makes sense that once you have actually sort of an emperor figure in your country, that you would actually become an empire. And since we already have sort of a dominion when it comes to Australia and Malaya, and we're soon gonna have the dominion of Indonesia, it makes sense that we would become an empire, and an empire deserves an emperor, obviously. Here we go, King. They still call him a king, Edward, but surely he's an emperor, right? I don't know. You know, I'm not entirely sure what the empire, there we go, managed to break through. It took far longer than necessary, but as I said before, it's actually much better to just grind your generals on the strait, or on the basically crossing there, because, well, you just grind your generals, and that's what this game is all about. Before Waking the Tiger, before we had all these like general traits and everything like that, but here we go. Yep, Australian Empire. Now that's actually quite wonderful. Australian Empire. Sounds a little cringy, but it's definitely interesting. Here we can make a choice either to go against the Japanese or with the Japanese, but I think we should work on a bit of industry beforehand. Yep, definitely. But I think it's time to mop up this little Indonesian conflict before anything else. Alright, time to expand the empire and secure Siam. Now, we could puppet Siam, but I think we have, at the moment, we have too many puppets. I mean, we have Australia and Indonesia. I skipped over it, but yeah, we managed to win the civil war, and that automatically puppets Indonesia to be your dominion, essentially, or just puppet. And we do have, we have to call them into the war, don't we? Yeah, call them into the war. But we also have Australia and Malaya. And it gets a little bit confusing because they're both the same color, and yeah, so that's a little bit confusing. But as we can see here, we have a mighty, masterful opportunity to just encircle 3 divisions, which I think is like half the army of Siam. It's not the best position to actually hold if you're playing Siam and going against, for example, the Allies or anything. Either you manage to actually defend the entirety of that little, which you might call it the little, I don't know, frontier, I suppose, frontier position, or you just abandon it and hold those 2 tiles that we're currently encircling them with. They didn't even manage to like hold their own line. It's not like we broke through or anything. They didn't even put an army there, so that's a little bit strange. But we should have no trouble, essentially, just mopping up. Yep, a few more encirclements, absolutely brilliant. Just smashing them across this little snaky peninsula, which is quite an interesting, not design, but quite an interesting looking geographical feature. That's the proper terminology, I suppose. But we still have the volunteer corps, or we still, you know, have all the bonuses from our focus tree, which actually, once you add up all those bonuses, you become quite OP. But as I said at the beginning of the video, it takes like until 1940 till you become really a powerful country. But it's until then you're still just kind of like, even at this point we still have only a couple of divisions. We're not necessarily all that powerful when it comes to the military, because our industry, while yes, you do get a lot of bonuses for it, still takes quite a long time till it gets going. And one thing that I actually kind of like about this entire mod is that you get an insane debuff at the beginning, which I think you get also in vanilla when you do get or you still have the Great Depression debuff at the beginning of the game. But it's such an insane debuff that you really need those OP focuses to actually start doing something. So on one hand, you know, Australian is such a strange position at the beginning that it would be unreasonable to expect them to do anything without a really overpowered focus tree. And on the other hand, what do you see in vanilla? Even if you go sort of down an interesting path, because the focus tree for Australia is sort of barren, it's mostly tailored to playing sort of a support role, not necessarily much industry or anything like that. Just you can maybe support the Americans, you can maybe support the African front, you can maybe support the invasion of Italy or something like that, or hold Greece. You can only do so many things, and if you don't go democratic as Australia, you can't necessarily do anything that's actually worthwhile. It's mostly just boring. Probably just gonna sit on your hands and support Japan here and there, and then get invaded by the Americans and just lose. That's your ultimate fate when you're playing Fascist Australia with the vanilla focus tree, unless you do some shenanigans. Obviously, again, puppet China, puppet communist China, get infinite manpower, get a lot of resources, wait a while, and Siam is gone. But yeah, so I do think that this focus tree, even though it's quite OP, it's reasonable when it comes to the gameplay, because, well, it's a game, and that means it should be at least a little bit fun, right? Okay, so it should be time to go up against China. I have a war goal against the Guanzi clique because, well, it makes sense to invade them. They have, for one, they have the most resources, obviously, but they're also the closest. And that little island there is ripe for the taking. I think it's an island. Hard to find 4 sort of merges. Sometimes peninsulas and islands, you know, look too similar. For example, Crimea looks just completely wrong in this game, but well, it's the best they can do, and obviously it makes sense within the game when it comes to the straits and everything like that. But there we go, successful invasion. This should be a piece of cake, since Japan has been fighting them for so long. It shouldn't really take all that long just to push through. And there we go, Yunnan and everything like that. The entire Chinese United Front should be getting called in here quite soon-ish. And ultimately that's actually what we want, because even though we might take out the Guanzi clique, we obviously want more than just the southern warlords. We actually want all of them, or at least a lot of China. Probably we'll probably split it half and half with Japan, because they've been fighting in quite a lot, but they haven't really made any progress, which is something that it bothers me so much that in the AI of Japan has such trouble just smashing China, even though it's like the easiest thing ever if you actually play as Japan. It's the easiest thing ever. You just wait on the border, escalate, 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 and just KO them within, like, I don't know, 2 months essentially. There we go, there we go. Almost all of the warlords have been called in, or basically almost all of the members of the Chinese United Front. And again, we have some trouble pushing across these straits, which is obviously wonderful. But hey, what can you do? It's yeah, that's just how the game is designed. Some OP focuses again; those are the best, obviously. And plant victory gardens. Plant those gardens. But no, we're not gonna do that. I'm working on actually annexing our puppets, because we do gain some core territory from them, and obviously they have insane resources, especially Malaya. But Indonesia, to a certain extent as well. Well, to a certain extent, you know, they have some of the most resources, some of the best resources in the entire game. So, for example, rubber. It's virtually impossible for the Axis to get any sort of meaningful source of rubber unless you're playing with, unless Siam doesn't capitulate, or if Siam actually joins either the Axis or the Japanese faction. So Siam is realistically one of the only sources of rubber for the Axis, and if you manage to take all of it as the Allies, then the Axis are just starved. The Allies, theoretically, they do have a couple of sources. For example, Belgium, France, and Africa, obviously. And again, the British Malay and the Dutch East Indies. But if you'd manage to take those over, for example, Italy has a really good time taking over rubber in Africa, and actually Ethiopia has some rubber. Yeah. Abyssinia has some rubber. So okay, so you have like three or four rubber there. But yeah, Italy can take care of French and Belgian rubber sources in Africa. And the Japanese can just take away the rubber and all of the resources of Malaya and Indonesia quite swiftly. So yeah, these countries have actually insane resources. So again, the Australian position within Hearts of Iron 4, within sort of a geopolitical sphere in general, if you would want to sort of, in a hypothetical reality, if some sort of Australian empire were to exist, they'd have so many resources, you know, in Hearts of Iron 4, essentially. They have so many resources, would be one most overpowered countries ever, you know. And seeing as those countries I just mentioned are, you know, still relatively prosperous, the empire wouldn't actually be all that terrible. It would be kind of an interesting situation, because, well, those you know, those holdings would be quite valuable, and that hypothetical Australian empire would actually be quite an interesting sight to behold, whether something like that would actually be feasible, whether it be sort of even possible to hold an empire like that together, since it's just a whole bunch of islands, right? Like whether an empire like that would actually last longer than a few decades, for example. I mean, I suppose colonialism proved that something like that, you know, holding those islands, even though they're islands and they're very far away, something like that is possible. But I don't know. I think Australia would have an easier time dealing with something like that. We still haven't broken through those straits there. But yeah, everything's basically going fine. Since we're putting a lot of, well, not a lot of pressure, but some pressure on, there we go, managed to break through. You always eventually break through if you have good enough divisions, but it's always a bit of a pain, but at least your generals get grinded. It's always a sort of a 50-50, you know. Do you want to waste a lot of manpower and equipment and everything, but your generals do get better? and you actually tend to cause a lot of casualties because you're constantly winning those battles, right? So the enemy loses quite a lot of manpower, but you aren't getting through. So it's just basically grinding. Like that's the definition, almost the definition of grinding, just smashing your face across some straits and everything like that. So it, yeah, quite an interesting situation there. There we go. We should be able to defeat the Guanzi, well, the Guanzis, the Guanzi clique. I don't know. Yeah, the Guanzi clique. We should be able to defeat. Yeah, there we go. The Guanzi clique quite soon, and now it's basically a free road into China. The Guanzi clique seems to be basically the most resilient warlord out of all of them. Even if you're playing, for example, Spain and take over Portugal, or just play Portugal, your only sort of venue of attack when it comes to China is obviously through Macau or through Hong Kong, whatever, through Guanzi clique essentially. However, that's the most resilient warlord, and that's some of the worst terrain because it's just mountainous, right? It's just mountainous, but at the same time they do have some of the best airfields there, so, you know, it should be the easiest, but it's also the most difficult. Sort of 50-50 there. The rest of China seems to just fall when you take over Guanzi clique because they're nowhere, that's a long lag. Something must be going on. Okay, just Legion in Romania. Okay, well, this game, Hearts of Iron 4 tends to be a little bit weird sometimes, but well, there we go. Yeah, once you take over Guanzi clique, it's like it's so easy to take out China. I mean, sure, it's quite a long fight, but it's nowhere as brutal as fighting within the mountains of Guanzi clique or southern China in general. So Yunnan tends to be a little bit annoying because of the mountainous terrain, but ultimately, yeah, taking out China here should be just relatively easy. At the same time, they're obviously fighting Japan, who seems to constantly be navally invading them and just smashing them in the north. But there's actually another thing that's sort of curious about the Japanese AI. They tend to prefer navally invading China and trying to win through that sort of strategy, but not necessarily doing all that well when it comes to just, you know, pushing from the northern border through Beijing and everything like that. It seems it's kind of a strange strategy because surely it's not the best. You'd want your troops to be resupplied from your own bases because you have more control over the infrastructure there. But, you know, it's just kind of strange. But that's the Hearts of Iron 4 AI for you. What a war. It's taking... Oh, there we go. I was just about to say that it's actually taking quite a long time, and the Japanese haven't really... Because the Japanese haven't captured Beijing, it's, yeah, it took quite a long time. I do have peace, player-led peace conferences on, so we'll try and split this sort of evenly. I mean, the Japanese, they have been quite a big help. I do think we would have been able to just do this alone, but because they distracted the Chinese quite a bit, I do think they should take the northern territories, actually. We'll take the southern stuff, because that's where we invaded from, obviously. And, yeah, they haven't actually ever captured Beijing, but whatever, we'll give it to them. Because of the numerous naval invasions, it was actually quite possible for us to just push through. One thing that's really annoying when trying to fight against China in sort of 1941, 1942, is that they get constant volunteers and supplies from the USSR, and that is really annoying. We'll also give them this, I think. Maybe that's actually too much. Yeah, we'll just give them, I think, that territory. It's sort of, the border's a little bit weird. It's not exactly split 50-50, because the... Oh, there we go. Forgot about that. It's not exactly split 50-50. You can't necessarily do that, because the borders aren't straight, obviously. Fighting in the US, I think you could actually do something like that, like some of the Midwest territories or Midwest states, they do actually have straight borders, which is a little bit strange, but you can definitely, you know, split that one 50-50 if you really try to. So there we go. That's China dealt with. And next on the stop, even though we've been sort of allies here, we're gonna have to take out Japan next, actually. Looks like the Japanese know exactly what I'm planning. Well, I'm planning a naval invasion. Because they have such a large fleet, I don't think this will be successful. But I also have a lot of aircraft over that little sea tile there, so maybe we'll win, maybe not. But here comes the big push through China. And yeah, Indochina is going to be a bit of a problem. We do obviously have a few divisions in Siam, or former Siam in China, in southern China, obviously. But yeah, this could be this could be a little bit annoying. Japanese Micronesia, now that's a force I'm really scared of. And the Americans can resupply. Hopefully they do actually deal with these naval battles here, because my navy is I haven't really been focusing on the navy. That's one thing that I really need to work on when playing as a nation within these regions, and not strictly in Europe or the Americas. I need to work on my naval focuses. I always sort of forget about them and just. Yeah, there we go. They are dominant. They're extremely dominant. But we are actually managing to shoot down and sink quite a lot of their ships, because, well, I do have a lot of naval bombers and fighters over that sea tile. But I don't know. It's gonna be a difficult fight. At least we'll try and push them out of Indochina and China itself. It'll be. Yeah, that's not gonna be, that's definitely not going our way. They have such naval dominance there. The Americans obviously nowhere to be seen, because that's just the Americans there. Yeah. In the Pacific, it's sort of interesting. In Europe, when you're fighting in Europe, the Americans just swarm in, you know? It's like the Germany first or the Italy first policy, you know, in action. But when it comes to the Pacific, the Americans are just sort of nowhere to be seen. Even their navy sort of just nowhere to be seen, which is quite curious. Looks like the Japanese got a little bit uppity there. But yeah. Oh, that's a lot of divisions, actually. That's a lot of divisions. It's Japanese AI, they constantly navally invade. It's we are basically just completely smashing them when it comes to actually fighting within China itself. But they just want to navally invade because, hey, they want to disrupt our lines, and I suppose it's a good strategy. But I mean, it's not necessarily sustainable, because they'll just lose. I mean, look at that. We're just smashing them completely. Obviously not in the naval department, but when it comes to the armed armies themselves, we're actually managing to do a lot of damage, and that's, I think, where it counts, because we're ultimately just going to drain their manpower. And, well, that's not going to be too good for them, is it? Alright, so after enduring countless naval invasions on my islands and in China proper and pushing them out of everywhere, it's finally time to bring it back and smash them back. It turns out they actually had no navy in that northern tile there. They had all their ships in the sort of the main tile that split our territory initially, and completely abandoned the sea tiles around their home islands just everywhere else. So it's not entirely sure what sort of strategy that is. But I suppose the AI sort of knows that you're planning a naval invasion there. But even then, they obviously knew I was going to navally invade once I got hold of the Korean Peninsula. So this is going to be a little bit strange. Again, the Americans didn't help at all. You know, I sort of hoped that they would at least try and naval invade their islands, or do something in the Pacific, or just do anything in the Pacific, but yeah, no. Maybe they had some sort of naval battle around, like, Midway, or maybe something like that, but yeah, they're nowhere to be seen, and that's, I don't know, it's a bit bothersome, it's annoying. You know, that's just the allied AI for you. I was actually kind of curious about this game, or this playthrough, this specific playthrough, is that because we took over British Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, the Japanese never attacked the Allies, meaning the Americans never actually joined the Allies. So even though we were only sort of focused on our little sphere, we've actually influenced the world quite a lot, because the British and the Americans never actually became allies. That's sort of interesting. The United States were sort of just limited to this little conflict, and the British were only limited to the European and African conflict, essentially. That is actually sort of interesting. That is actually very interesting, because you can sort of limit. You can sort of split this sort of grand alliance up quite a bit. Obviously the Soviets are still there, and obviously the Germans go after the Soviets, but it's an interesting experiment, right? Because like, how well would the Germans perform if they only had to worry about the European allies and the Soviets, or the the Western allies, without the United States and the Soviets? So only sort of, without the Americans, how well would they perform? Would they win or not? Now, obviously in Hearts of Iron 4, Germany always loses because they lose manpower, they run out of equipment, they don't have enough resources to support the higher tier equipment, and the Soviets eventually overwhelm them. When it comes to the AI, obviously, the player can just do whatever. You can invade the British Isles in like 1936, and it's okay. You can just smash them like that. It doesn't really matter. But because you can definitely like seriously play a navally focused Germany, because you're always going to destroy the lowlands, you're always going to destroy France because of their low stability and low surrender limit and everything like that. So you can always just smash them and then just completely annihilate the British fleet with naval bombers, and your fleet as well. The Italian fleet, the Italians actually in Europe have the easiest time invading the British, because once they take out Ethiopia, they can just request to join the Axis, put all of their fleet, when it comes to put all of their fleet in the German dockyards, and just, put most of their army there, something to defend the Italian peninsula itself, and then just invade Britain. It's some of the easiest stuff ever. The AI just never does any of that because, well, it's historical, I suppose. It would be a little bit strange if the Axis won every single game, obviously, but ultimately, yeah, the Axis powers and the Japanese and everyone like that, they obviously benefit from having a very dominant start, and the Allies obviously benefit from having a lot of time, which, that's realistic. That's obviously what happened. So, yeah, I suppose we're just gonna smash the Japanese here. It seems like it's going to be actually quite easy to dominate them, but yeah, a lot of troops, over, well, almost 300 divisions, and yeah, our empire is going to be finalized. The Japanese are putting such a high resistance here. It's like they didn't even try to defend China at all. But yeah, this is definitely the result if someone actually tries to invade. Well, this always happens in my games. From what I've seen of other players, they have like the easiest time invading like Britain and Japan and everything like that. Britain is easy because you can generally do it with better armies, but here, like, this is pure infantry, and I have insane generals, insane stats, grinded up everything. It's still quite, there we go. Finally, the war is over. Our empire is, our empire is finalized. But I suppose we should give the Americans something. Even though realistically, in something like that, I don't know. Actually, we could have a pretty decent relationship with the Americans. So let's just give them Southern Sakhalin and some of the northern, some of the northern homeland. There we go. And we'll take the rest because, well, we actually fought for it and fought and died and everything like that for it. So we'll just take the lot. Thank you very much. There's the Japanese. Whatever. Let's just, I guess we can puppet them, but we'll just take them directly. And Manchukuo as well. There we go. Now, there's Japanese Micronesia here. I guess we have to satellite them. We can't just annex them. That's a little bit strange. But, yeah, that's the Empire. The Australian Empire looking mighty. Now, I'm not entirely sure if something like, I guess it would become a superpower. In, like, the Cold War scenario, would become, like, the third superpower. Because, it's basically all of China, all of the... Yeah, it would become a superpower, quite definitely. So, at this point, we could take on the Soviets, we could take on the Americans, we could try and fight the Americans. That would take a while because we need to actually build a fleet. But, yeah, maybe we should have puppeted Japan. But, yeah, there we go. We could take on the Soviets and the Germans and everyone, but I think this is ultimately what we wanted to accomplish, and so there we go. The Empire of Australia with Edward VIII looking mighty. So there we go. Thanks, Kings, for watching, and see you next time.